navigate pain and suffering in those around us with both spiritual and physical support? That's the long and short of the question today, submitted from another listener.
Welcome to the Sifted Wheat Podcast with Leslie Lamb, a counselor by profession, a minister of truth, and a lover of people. This is a safe place where she sets a path for others to learn how to move through hard seasons with confidence and grace, encouraging your faith, empowering your choices, and challenging your perceptions through the Word, the wisdom from years of counseling others, and her own experience of being sifted. Here's Leslie.
The question we're tackling today is this. Dear counselor, I would like to know more about deliverance and healing. It's something that isn't talked about in the Christian community, and I think it needs to be addressed to help us see more from a spiritual perspective while also acknowledging true physical needs and disorders. Okay, can you say loaded question? Listen, I'm just going to be honest. I'm not sure that I have a definitive answer, so I invite you to join me as I hopefully rifle through information to come to a better understanding and healthier engagement. I think it might be best to start exploring this question with an unpopular opinion. I think we as Christians are often too focused on healing and deliverance and not focused enough on our physical, mental, and emotional health. Because of that, we have a tendency to see evil, wrongdoing, or injustice and infirmity and illness instead of an opportunity to reflect love, grace, and mercy to those that suffer. In that, we aren't too different from the generation of Jesus' time. The hurting and the suffering were all about them, but they were more focused on keeping from evil, that they didn't lean in and do the work of mercy. It's why Jesus said, "Go and discover the meaning of this. I desire mercy, not sacrifice." That's found in Matthew 12:7. He was pointing out that their acknowledgement of the law, in this case, not doing any work on the Sabbath, was keeping them from seeing the miracle he just performed. They were more concerned about the traditional observance of the Sabbath, an intentional rest designed by God, than they were in showing mercy to the suffering. Jesus also pointed out that the whole introduction of a Sabbath was as a provision of God for them to refrain from work rather than a punishment over them not to do anything. If we're not careful, we will rush to bring spiritual meaning to people, when really they just want to be seen and respected and provided for before they can open their heart to deeper involvement. Look, I'm not innocent in that, and I have had to walk it back several times when my loved one was struggling and my education and spiritual wisdom was too quick to say, "Pick up your mat and walk," when maybe what they needed was someone to sit with them beside their mats and meet them in the fear of diagnosis and suffering with emotional support and some physical sustenance. God has always been a God of provision. He's a nourisher. In fact, one of his names is El Shaddai, which literally means many-breasted one, pointing to the fact that he is the ultimate provider for all our needs. So to think that our sole role with people is to deliver them and bring healing distances us from the heart of the Father, who seeks to comfort and console. Before the first commandment was etched by his finger, he made sure that the Israelites had food and a means to shelter. Before the first rule was set in motion for establishing a community, water was released from a rock and manna was provided. Jesus' first miracle was providing wine for a wedding party so they wouldn't think poorly of their host. And in the midst of healing skin and hands and eyes and feet and issues of blood, he gathered loaves and fishes for his disciples and following crowds who came to listen, to sustain them for the rest of their journey. I think God is far more interested in our immediate needs than our limbs and our abilities. He cares about both, but he understands, sometimes better than we do, the importance of both. Even in relaying the love of a neighbor through the Good Samaritan, he highlights the kindness and nurture and provision of the one left to die, tending to his wounds, providing nourishment for him, and putting him in a safe place to continue the healing and recovering process. While at the same time, he points out the religious line of the rabbinic law as a stumbling block to true compassion. I might not be the best person to talk about this subject because I didn't grow up in an atmosphere of healing and deliverance. But over my lifetime, I've encountered it, both negatively and positively. I believe that some are gifted to bring healing. I recently met a woman that shared that she has the amazing ability to see into people and where they're hurting and pray into that space and see them healed and delivered. She said she doesn't even have to touch them. She just sees the issue spiritually and prays about it and believes for healing, and it comes. And I was prone to believe her because she shared that information humbly and without understanding why it actually occurs outside of her deep belief in the Lord and his supernatural ability to heal. She seemed just as astounded that it happens as I was when I heard it. I've met others with special giftings to pray over cancer and see it shrink and disappear. And I've experienced praying over barren wombs marked by doctors as infertile and seen them become fruitful with babies to be born. I've seen depression and anxiety resolve, and I've experienced demonic influence and manifestation flee after being cast out calmly and with strong authority. I've prayed for brains and new neural pathways to be forged, as well as trauma-informed pathways to heal. And I've seen the fruit of that. Those are amazing experiences, and they never get old. And I'm always in awe of what I've seen God do. But for even more stories, I haven't had those experiences. Instead, I've stood by hospital beds whispering promises as my loved one breathed their last. I've buried boxes no bigger than a carry-on, holding something so precious the world couldn't keep. And I've sat in grief over debilitating illnesses and deformities. I know there are people who have lost their faith over less, but despite the unknown of healing and suffering, I trust that God is still good. Jesus didn't heal every person that was around him. And when he encountered suffering, he didn't always point to either a failure of man or a failure of God, like we can tend to do if we're honest. And speaking of honesty, I still wrestle with this topic. I don't have the answer. I suppose for myself, what I've decided is that I will always err, quote unquote, on the side of faith, if that's possible. I will believe for the healing and the miracle until I cannot, until the final breath is released and the heart stops and the time of death given. And even then, I have hope and expectation that the no on earth just became an eternal yes in heaven. I'm still trying to understand suffering and grief in the space of healing. I think if we push it away too soon, it isn't good for us. I've seen the evidence of grief suppressed, manifesting as pain and turmoil in the body or as destructive choices to numb or to escape. I think if we tell people that they shouldn't have to struggle or suffer, that when they do, it just creates confusion and shame, and that isn't the glory of God revealed. I remember several years ago when I was feeling hopeless, shameful, and afraid. I didn't want to get out of bed. I wanted to fade away with the world and very often would feel homesick for a world where no pain and no suffering or heartache existed. As a Christian, I felt like I had to hide that. I would tell myself I should love Jesus better, and being depressed is a sin against all he has done for me. Of course, that only made the shame worse and the fear more overwhelming because now I'm not just depressed, but I'm ashamed that I'm not a better Christian. Someone close to me pulled me aside and pointed me to the story of Elijah and asked me, what was God's response to his depression? I pulled the pages of the story closer and read 1 Kings 19. And I found that an angel found him curled up beside a tree and woke him and offered food and drink. Elijah ate the cake and water and laid back down until the next time he was roused from sleep and was offered more food and drink and was told, arise and eat, for your journey ahead will be too difficult for you if you don't. This time the angel gave him meat, which sustained him for a journey that led him to a cave of a mountain. And there on that mountain, God spoke to him, encouraged him to see beyond his fears and receive a new perspective. And after that time, he was strengthened to fight and minister and serve the Lord yet again. It took time to meet his immediate need, to rest, to work through his emotions and his fears, and to be met with truth. If God rushed straight into truth, Elijah would have been even more overwhelmed, more afraid, and this time feeling like he'd failed God. That's what exhaustion was telling him. But instead, with some rest and some nourishment and some quiet time to reflect, God brought courage. and healing. He offers us the same. The angel didn't show up with a sword to fight a spiritual battle, but a jug of water and a cake. He didn't tell Elijah, get up and get back out there. No, he invited him to rest and to recover and take the time to be strengthened. I needed that invitation from my friend. I needed to know that there was a time for my journey and that when I was ready, God would share his truth with me in a way that would continue to revive my soul. I needed his grace over my judgment. I needed to be rescued into his presence, not delivered from evil. And once I was more resilient not to take that same path again. Recently, I was sitting with a client and she said, I wish I'd be healed already. She wanted the past to dissolve and new choices to automatically appear. I felt for her. If only it could be that easy. But for what she sought healing, God was working out resolution. She wanted her brain to be healed, and he wanted her mind to be renewed and her life transformed. He wanted her to believe the truth so that she could create new patterns of thought and model healthier choices and behaviors from a heart of empathy, not one that forgot the struggle of suffering. He wanted to see generations redeemed, not just his daughter to feel better temporarily. I guess at the end of the day, healing and deliverance is one of those spaces where we're best to let God lead. If you feel God telling you to pray and lay hands on people and believe for healing, do that and trust his outcome over your own. He truly does see all things and know all things. And his plan is better even if we don't understand it. And on all occasions, show grace, goodness, and mercy for the struggles of others. Allow the pain and struggle to point you to God's glory, where you will find his compassion and comfort and a source of peace and hope the world can't give. I remember a few weeks before my young cousin died. I was sitting in the assisted living home, feeling the weight of his suffering and longing for his healing, and quite honestly, being upset with God that he hadn't yet been healed. Rob looked at me and said, "Don't be mad. I didn't ask for this, but I know that it is what it took to save my soul." And here's the thing. So many years later, not only did his temporary life and tragedy save his soul, but in that suffering and heartache, God reached out and rescued other family members that we love. Our prayers for his healing did so much more than sustain him to have more time with us. They did so much more than take him to a place where he is completely free from the tent of a quadriplegic body. But those prayers made the way for more to find healing for their souls. Generations, I might add. So delivery or healing or not, I'm pretty sure despite the pain and the hardship and the prison that his body became, my dear cousin would say it was worth it not to have healed here. In fact, I don't have to imagine that because he practically did say that, and his soul is eternally healed. And our relationship will resume as soon as I see him again, without end. Jesus didn't come to fix all things. He came to restore and redeem them. And that has an eternal timeline. Okay, I'm not crying, you are. Okay, maybe I'm crying a little bit, but on that hopeful note, this is the ending to this Dear Counselor segment. But if you'd like, we can do this again next season. So keep listening for the next space where I ask for your questions and do my best to answer them. Before we jump into another series, I have a special guest next time, the creative and kind Lexi Wooten. I know that you'll be blessed by her testimony and how God has taught her where pornography set her up for failure in relationships. I was honored to chat with her, and I'm so excited to introduce her to you. Until then, keep inquiring and requiring of God, because I assure you, He is listening.